Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Pursuit Zone podcast. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and this podcast interviews explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 187 with Nikki Ray, where we talk about her cycling adventure from Europe to Ghana. So let's start the show, and let me introduce Nikki. Starting in Spain, she cycled 10,000 kilometers across 13 countries to reach Ghana on a bike she built from recycled components. It was an adventure she called Ready, Steady, Slow, in an effort to remind herself not to rush and to patiently take in everything going on around her. But going slow can be a difficult challenge when the setbacks begin to mount, like colliding with a taxi in Senegal and injuring a knee, to cycling through the desert in extreme heat, to not having the correct tools to fix a disintegrating wheel. You can learn more about her journey at her website, readysteadyslow.wordpress.com. Nikki Ray, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you so much for having me.
Nikki, how did you first get interested in cycle touring?
Yeah, it's a good question. So actually I started cycling again as an adult. I cycled as a child and then didn't for a long time. And when I was at university, I did a charity fundraising cycle that was in the Indian Himalayas. That was 700 kilometers. So after that, I got my own bike as an adult, started riding around London a bit. And then I was job searching. I had a lot of time on my hands and I decided, okay, I'm going to get a wrap for my bike and I'm going to go cycling in Scotland by myself and just see what happens. So from then, I guess it was kind of growing an interest. The tours I did, so that one was maybe 10 days with stops in Scotland. And I did some that were 2 weeks and then 6 weeks. And then, I expanded from there.
The 700 kilometers through the Indian Himalayas, what was that like?
Considering I hadn't ridden a bicycle properly as an adult, it was quite a challenge. I did some training before to make sure that my riding skills were okay. But it was easy compared to what I just did because we were supported, we weren't carrying our luggage, we were using rented mountain bikes that were like of a very good quality. But I remember on that trip meeting a couple, I think from a European country, but I can't remember exactly where, that was cycle touring like around the world and they were carrying a trailer. And so me and the other people that were doing the charity cycle ride were probably around about 20, 21, 22 years old. And we just thought they were absolutely mad. And it's really funny thinking about that story now. And now I'm the person that maybe people that meet me along the way think that I'm absolutely mad. But yeah, it was absolutely amazing, like cycling through the Himalayan mountain ranges. It was a really great life achievement.
So you're 10 days on your own through the Scottish Highlands back in 2015. What did you take away from that adventure that you wanted to keep going?
There were good things and bad things. So I rode that trip on, I would call it a mountain bike. My friends that mountain bike would say, no, it's a rubbish mountain bike, like more like a leisure bike. It was really heavy. I was carrying far too much luggage and I didn't know anything about mechanics then. So my gears on the front chain ring, I couldn't go into the lowest gear. And for those that don't know, Scotland's a very mountainous place. So I learned don't carry so much luggage and get a lighter bike. But I also learned about myself that I can just endure so much because it's more in the mind than in your legs. Like on the first day, I cycled 100 kilometers. I'd never cycled that distance in my life. And when I arrived, I was staying with my friend's brother who lives in the Highlands, who's a bike mechanic. And he asked me, how on earth did you get over those mountains not being able to use your lowest gears? And I said, I don't know. I just kept going at a steady pace. So I learned many things, I guess, about myself mentally, but also about, technicalities of cycle touring. And it is helpful to know more about mechanics. So my friend's brother fixed up my bike for me and then I carried on and everything was fine. But it would have been better if I could have fixed it myself, which now over the years I've been able to learn mechanic skills. So actually I learned a lot thinking about it.
Why did you want to do this adventure going to Ghana?
I went to Ghana when I was 18 and I made lots of friends there, who I've stayed in contact with. And I've been back to visit a few times. And so it was a combination of a few things. One, that I really enjoy traveling overland by bicycle or by train or by bus, basically by public transport without flying. And I thought in the past that maybe I was going to try and get to Ghana or at least get to Senegal by public transport. And I have a very good friend called Aisha in Ghana that then I made a joke with saying, okay, one day I'm going to cycle to come and see you, which initially she was like, haha, that's hilarious, not thinking that I actually would. And then I guess the challenge of cycling by myself as a solo woman, doing this kind of trip, which people don't expect women to do by themselves, even though many do, but people don't expect us to be doing that kind of thing. They think it's dangerous, etc. So I actually started cycling, and it was only in about Morocco that I told my friend in Ghana that I was coming, because I felt there was quite a lot of pressure and I wanted to see the first few months how it was going. And then I realized when I got to Senegal, like, yeah, sure, I can definitely make it to Ghana.
What was going on at age 18 that ended you up or so that you ended up in Ghana?
So when I was a teenager, I actually wanted to go and perform in the theatre and go into musical theatre, which didn't quite work out for me. So during the process of realising, okay, I'm going to push that to one side, I decided to go travelling. And I thought about different places. I actually almost went to East Africa, but in the end I went to Ghana and did a volunteering thing, which many teenagers from the UK do. They call it a gap year if you end up going to university afterwards. I learned a lot of things whilst I was there, that this kind of volunteering actually isn't massively helpful to the communities that you're supposed to be helping. But alongside that, I made many friends. So my friend Aisha actually is a niece or cousin, I think, of somebody that was working with my mum. So a Ghanaian that had moved to the UK that was working with my mum. So then I met many other people in Ghana from that initial reason for going to Ghana. And then I went back and visited, and since have actually met people that have smaller organisations that are working on a more grassroots level, which I think are having more impact. And also they're run by Ghanaians rather than foreign people.
Now, you built this bike yourself out of mostly recycled components. Why go that way versus just buying a new one?
Yeah, so some of the people along the way, which I think you might ask me about later, were telling me that my bike was really rubbish and not very good. Since I started cycling in Scotland, that first cycle touring time, I've been gradually getting better and better at mechanics. And actually, it was my friend Jo who she decided to build her bike by herself. So she inspired me that I also wanted to do the same thing. So the recycled bit comes from this charity in London and Birmingham called the Bike Project that I do some work for. So they get lots of people to donate bikes to the charity, and they refurbish them and they donate them to refugees in the UK, because especially in London, the cost of transport is so high. So if you're an asylum seeker or a refugee and you're not allowed to work, it's really difficult for you to travel around. So through my association with them and the work I did with them, there's lots of secondhand parts that we have in the workshop. And so looking at that and building up my mechanic knowledge, I thought, you know what? I'm going to challenge myself, and I'm going to not only cycle to Ghana, but I'm going to build my own bike and then ride it to Ghana. So the hybrid bike that I was riding on, I did a swap at the charity's workshop, and I got a frame and then two very good wheels from different manufacturers that they were all secondhand and weren't being used. And then I have lots of friends in London who are mechanics who have lots of spare parts. So it must have been across about 5 or 6 different people. I got lots of the components and then built the bike with a little bit of help from my friend in his flat. So obviously some of the components were new, like the chain and the gears and stuff, but more than half of it was from recycled parts. Even the tyres, actually, they were ever so slightly used. And actually in total, the bike, I don't know what the conversion into dollars is, but it cost me less than £200. And I thought that was a really great thing as well. Like, I'm reusing these parts. It hasn't cost me very much money. I've made it myself. Like, I felt very empowered at the end. Like, yeah, I'm not a trained or official mechanic, but I was able to do this stuff from knowledge that I've gained over the years. So yeah, I'm really glad. And also the bike is still living now. Like, since I came back, I changed lots of the components, but she's still going strong.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense to me. If you're going to take a long bike ride into Africa, why not build it yourself so you know everything about it? And if it breaks down, you know better how to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. So when things did break down, because I put it all together myself, I knew what was wrong. So some of the things, this is probably a UK phrase, but it was a bit of a botched job. So for example, the frame was a little bit too narrow for the gears that we put in. So I knew I needed to stretch the frame to get the wheel back in. I knew certain things that we'd done to the bike, which wasn't maybe traditional ways of like building a bike. So that definitely helped me on my trip when, of course, things broke and I needed to fix them.
So what size of tires or wheels were you using?
So I used 700C wheels, so it's like 28 inch, and with 35 millimeter width tires. That I'm going to say the brand name because they were the best. They were Marathon Mondial, and some of my friends at home said, "Oh, why are you using those tires? They're going to be so rubbish. You're going to get loads of punctures." But honestly, they were the best. The one that's on the front of my bike at the moment, I put on in Senegal. So obviously the back tire wears out quicker because of the weight of the luggage, but they were really great tires.
Did you take an extra set of tires with you?
So I didn't start off with an extra set of tires, but I think in Spain I ordered some tires that were folding. So I carried them in the bottom of my pannier bags because basically I had this paranoia that my tires were going to wear down or explode or something in the middle of the desert, and there would be no way that I'd be able to get new tires. Also, after I built the bike, lots of people from the workshop of the charity that I work for were saying, "Why are you using 28-inch wheels? Don't you know that no one in sub-Saharan Africa uses them?" Which actually is not true, but people think that most bikes there are 26-inch, which is more a mountain bike wheel size. So because of that as well, I had this paranoia of I'm not going to be able to buy tires. So then I carried them with me, which actually made it much more convenient because then I could just change my tire when I needed to. And also slowly my luggage was getting lighter as I used one tire and then the other.
Now, why did you name your bike Frida?
So the very first bike that I rode in Scotland, I named, it's a bit of a random story, but yeah. I named her Kwamina, which was, so Kwame and Mena are Ghanaian names, but I'd been reading, I think the guy was called Kwame. Basically, I wrote my dissertation for my master's about LGBT rights in Ghana, and there was this very homophobic man whose name was something like Kwame. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take his name and I'm going to change it to make it female and name my bike Kwamena. So anyways, the second bike I had, I didn't manage to name. I was trying to force it and the name just wasn't coming. And for this one, for the whole trip, I didn't really have a name for the bike, but I knew that she was female. I built her and I was like, okay, this bike is female. And then my girlfriend came to visit me in Morocco and we watched a film about Frida Kahlo's life. And I think she's a really inspirational woman. And also her name has the word free in it, which is a bit cheesy, but when I ride my bike, I feel free. So then I was like, okay, I've got it. The name of my bike is going to be Frida. It just made sense.
What did you have for a luggage setup this time?
So I had a very strong back rack that was made of aluminium but reinforced with steel. And I also started off with a small kind of shelf front rack that I had my lightweight tent on. But I actually had a couple of crashes. One of them was very early on in Spain. And so the aluminium got a bit bent and damaged. Then over time, I fixed it in Morocco, but then going over unpaved bad roads, it eventually broke. So I had 2 large pannier bags on the back, my tent, my sleeping bags, all the stuff. I was carrying my ukulele, which I played for different people that I stayed with along the way. And then eventually I had this kind of shopping bag that I would carry extra water bottles and extra food in that over time just got like bigger and bigger and ended up carrying a lot of rubbish. So it wasn't like a traditional setup. Well, it was traditional setup in the sense of like the pannier bags and stuff, but I ended up, because of breaking the front rack, actually carrying a lot of stuff on the back, which didn't fare so well on like unpaved bad roads, and it meant that I broke a lot of spokes on my back wheel and the tires wore down like a lot quicker than if I'd been spreading the weight. However, I felt that when I had the front rack and I was cycling through sand, that it made the steering much more twitchy and actually harder for me to control the bike. So in that respect, I think it worked out well that my front rack broke and I was forced to carry everything on the back.
You mentioned a tent. What else did you have for camping setup?
A lightweight 2-person tent that weighed, I think, 1.8 kilograms. Then I had a folding sleeping mat that was not the most comfortable thing ever. And a sleeping bag that I think was maybe 2-season. And then I had a small Trangia stove, which had like a cooking pot and stuff. And I had a cup and a spork to eat with. But actually, in the end, I didn't end up cooking that much food because especially in sub-Saharan Africa, food was so readily available on the roadside. And in places like Morocco, every single person that I stayed with would feed me a lot of food. So I didn't actually have that much need for the stove, but I'm glad that I had it with me just in case.
Now, there's not much on your blog for the Spain and Portugal part. So how did you get to the start?
I'd never really intended to write a blog. I'd thought about it, and then I thought, no, there's going to be too much pressure to update it. So it was only in Morocco that I decided to write it. Therefore, I decided not to backwrite and talk about Spain and Portugal. So basically, one of the reasons why I decided to do this trip at the time that I did was this other bike tour that I've helped to organize in the past that's called Ecotopia Bike Tour that happens in Europe every summer. So their route was across the top of Spain and down through Portugal. So I decided, because of work and other personal reasons, that I was going to get a boat straight to Spain and start from there rather than cycling through France. Yeah, I was like, okay, I'm just not going to do any cycling in England. I'm just going to start from Santander in the north of Spain. So I got a train to the south coast of England. I stayed with a friend, and then I went to the port of Plymouth. And then I got a boat, which took about 24 hours from Plymouth to Santander, which is the north of Spain. And then I started riding. It was more expensive than whether I'd got a bus or something, but I've put my bike on loads of coaches, maybe you call them coaches, or buses in the past, and often bits from your bike can get damaged. But with the ferry, you just ride your bike onto the boat and you ride it off the other side. So it made a lot of sense for me. So yeah, so from Santander, which is kind of almost the northeast of, well, kind of north central of Spain, I cycled along the top. So Galicia is the northwestern region of Spain. So I cycled there, and then this was with a group of people from this bike tour that I'd helped to organise. And then we cycled through Portugal, into central Portugal, and then I split off by myself and carried on through Portugal, went back into Spain, Andalusia, and then went to Algeciras, which is near Gibraltar. And I got the ferry from there until Ceuta, which is actually a Spanish enclave on Moroccan African soil. And then I crossed into Morocco. So yeah, so the first bit of my tour was actually quite different because it was this giant group of people, sometimes 40 people cycling at one time. We were all cooking together. We were setting the route together. We wouldn't cycle very far each day, sometimes only like 30 kilometers, which in the end, because I was at the beginning of this big trip, I got a bit frustrated about. But because I'd helped to organise this bike tour, I decided, okay, I was going to join them. Then I went into Morocco, and then I started writing about it from Rabat, which was when I actually met a Scottish family who saw me in the city with my bike and started to talk to me. And the girl from the family said, well, do you have a blog? Like, can people read about what you're doing? And I said, oh, no, I thought about it, but I decided not to write a blog. But she really insisted people would like to hear your story, so please write a blog. And they were kind of maybe the 5th or 6th people that had been asking me to write a blog. So I decided, okay, that's what's going to happen. Yeah, I guess lots of people cycle tour around Europe, but less people cycle tour in Africa. So I thought, okay, it's more important to write about the African part than the European part.
What did you save up for a budget for this trip?
That's a good question. So in London, I work as a freelance cycling instructor, and I ride my bike everywhere, and I live in a kind of communally run house. So my monthly outputs are quite low. So I sort of accidentally saved up money, like over the last 5 years from different bits of work I was doing. Yeah, so I realized like the timings all came together with the bike tour starting in September, with wanting to go see my friend Aisha, with realizing that I had enough money in my bank account. I tried to make some rough estimations of how much money I might spend. So I worked out if I spent £10 each day, how much money I would need. And I had that money in my bank account. I actually had a lot left over at the end. So I saved up like a few £1,000s. But some days I spent almost no money, and other days I spent a lot. For example, when I was having to purchase a visa, which sometimes in sub-Saharan Africa can cost almost $100 or something. So it wasn't a specific, okay, I'm saving up money for this trip that I've planned many years in advance. It was something that had been on my mind. And then I realized, okay, the stars have aligned at this moment in time. So now's the time to do it.
Do you still work as a cycling instructor?
Yeah, so basically when I came back to London, I stepped into exactly the same shoes I'd been in before, kind of by accident, but also by necessity. So I teach cycling to children in primary schools, like junior schools, and also to adults as group lessons or as individual lessons. And sometimes with adults, it's because somebody wants to cycle to work, but they're a bit nervous and anxious to cycle through London, which can be a very busy place to cycle. So sometimes I cycle with people on their route between their house and where they work. And then I also work for the Bike Project to donate bikes to refugees. And we have a specific section called Pedal Power, which teaches refugee women and teenage girls how to ride bikes. And then once they graduate from the program, then they take their bike home. So yes, I'm still doing that for the near future, at least.
Once you get to Morocco, from that point on, how are you navigating?
A lot of things changed actually when I got onto the African continent. I was navigating using a free map application called Osmond, where you can download like 7 different regions for free. So I was using that for the rest of the trip. I also had a paper map, but it was a road map though of West Africa just as a backup, which I only really used once or twice when my phone broke. But to be honest, navigating in Africa was not that difficult because there's not so many options of roads. Whereas in Europe, the main roads are so busy. If they're like motorways or highways, you're not allowed to ride on them. So it actually takes a lot of effort to navigate through Europe. But Morocco, yeah, there's a bigger road network, but from like Western Sahara and Mauritania, it was pretty simple to navigate. And yeah, I never really had any problems.
So in Morocco, you have to deal with the Atlas Mountains. I remember looking through your blog that you mentioned a couple different, like the high Atlas Mountains and was it the low Atlas Mountains? What's the difference?
In Morocco, there's actually 3 mountain ranges. The one in the north I went through briefly, but I don't remember the specific. Is it the Rift? Okay, I can't remember the exact name of the one in the north, but there's a place called Chefchaouen that a lot of tourists go to visit. So that's one area of mountains. And then in the middle, near to Marrakesh, there's the High Atlas Mountains. So from the name, there's the highest section of the mountains around. And then there's the Anti-Atlas Mountains, which are further south, kind of on the edge of the desert. And what's really interesting is the rock formations between the Anti-Atlas and the High Atlas Mountains are completely different because they were created in different time periods. I can't remember which years in history. But the Anti-Atlas Mountains, they kind of almost look like dinosaurs. They have lots of kind of ripple effects where you can see that the mountains have been pushed up and created. I really love mountains, and so I didn't have to cycle over them. I've read different people's blogs who cycle along the coast of Morocco, but a lot of people live along the coast of Morocco. There's big roads. I didn't want to do that, so I kind of did a wiggly route through Morocco. I also hadn't intended to visit Marrakesh. I'd heard all different stories, and also that was very touristy, and wondered as a woman if I would have a good time. However, I heard about this bicycle project, which sounded similar to the one that I work for in London, and so I thought I had to visit them. So they're called Pikala, which is the slang word in Morocco for bicycle. So it's Pikala, and it's set up by a Dutch lady. And so it's training local Moroccans to become bike mechanics. They run tours around the city, so tourists pay, and that generates more income for the charity. They've been teaching women and girls how to cycle, also like my project was doing. That's why I wanted to visit. And they do many other things. At the moment that I visited, they were doing a kind of art and bicycle project for the community to visit. And I'm sure they do many other things. So if you're interested, look them up. So I decided to go to Marrakesh to visit that project. And then I was like, okay, great. So this means I'm definitely going over the Atlas Mountains, high Atlas Mountains, which by that point, I think it was October or November. So it was getting cold. So I was like, it's now or never. It's going to get too snowy. I found the high Atlas Mountains really difficult, beautiful, but not as enjoyable as the anti-Atlas Mountains. So the reason is it's a main road that's going over the top of the Atlas Mountains. And it was being redone, like rebuilt at the time I was going over, which made it meant that it was really muddy. It was a very, very bad surface. There was a lot of cars and minibuses and even huge coaches and trucks going past. And it was absolutely freezing. So I was thinking that I might have camped, but in the end, I stayed at a restaurant actually for free. I went in to get food, and then the guy said, do you want to stay? My family house is next door. So I stayed in their living room. And another time there was like a hostel at one of the highest points I stayed at. It was absolutely freezing. And actually during those moments, once I got down from the mountains, I got a really bad fever and was ill for quite a few days. But I'm glad that I did it. I can't remember what the highest point was. I think 2,000 and something meters. It was really wonderful. And so then I was debating whether to go over the anti-Atlas Mountains. And I'd met a couple who were also doing a cycle tour in Marrakesh. And so they went ahead of me and they cycled over the anti-Atlas Mountains, and they said, yeah, Nikki, you have to go over. It's wonderful. Even though they weren't, the anti-Atlas isn't actually that far away from the high Atlas, just the change in temperature was unbelievable. So there was no snow. It was actually really hot. The gradients were actually, maybe it was the route that I chose that was more kind of smaller roads, but there were such steep gradients. And at one point going over this massive mountain, I was literally cycling for 5 minutes and then having to stop because it was like sweltering heat, very, very bumpy road service and also steep incline. But getting to the top of that point was really amazing. So I'm really glad that I went over both of those mountain ranges and into a little bit of the ones in the north, because after that, pretty much it was like flat desert until there are some mountains in Guinea, but that was many countries ahead. So I was like, okay, great, we've done the mountains. Then when I got into the beginning of the desert, it was the most amazing thing, because I think the first 2 or 3 days I must have had a wind coming from behind, and the road surface had recently been redone, so it was really smooth. It was flat, only going up and down a tiny bit, so I was like speeding along. Yeah, but then it got different. So I don't know if you want to ask me specific questions about the desert section.
So at this point where you're beginning to enter the desert, are you still in Morocco?
Yeah, the desert, there's a place called Gulmim, which they call like the gateway to the Sahara. So that's still in Morocco. And actually it was quite a few 100 kilometers of the Sahara Desert inside the south of Morocco before it turned into Western Sahara. So the first 3 days were great. I was having a great time. I was thinking, I don't know why everyone doesn't cycle through the desert. I'm having such a great time. But it all depends whether you're cycling directly south, a little bit to the west, a little bit to the east. So people were telling me, oh yeah, sure, you'll be totally fine. The wind always comes from the north, which is like a massive lie. Maybe in different seasons that's true. But basically, I think the wind after that pretty much was always coming towards me. So from a southwesterly or a southeasterly direction. And even when the road bent, somehow the wind was always coming towards you. So that section of my trip, I think, is the bit that I'm the most proud of, because it was the most physically, but more difficult, most mentally challenging section. The same thing as I'd mentioned for sections in Morocco, or in the Atlas Mountains actually, the road in a lot of sections was being resurfaced. So basically the detour was either on like pure bumpy rock, or sometimes later on in Mauritania was just sand. So you had to push or struggle over these bumpy, rocky sections, which was really difficult. And then with a headwind, and then if it was going slightly uphill, it was just unbearable. And the further I got south in the desert, the sandier it got. I started wearing a sand scarf that I already had from a trip I'd done previously to Mali. I think it was after Laayoune, which is kind of the capital of Western Sahara. After that, I started wearing this sand scarf, because south of Laayoune, there's these massive sand dunes. And when there's wind, it's just like blowing all over the place, gets into your shoes. And when it was sandy and windy, there's lots of trucks that are going up and down the desert, either going further south into West Africa or moving things up and down. So every time they would pass in the opposite direction, they would just blow all of this sand over me, and the force of their speed and the wind would actually push me backwards a bit, or even more scary, push me from side to side. So up until the mountains in Morocco, I hadn't really been listening to any music. I just liked to cycle and look around me and talk to people that I meet on the way. But in the mountains, and then basically every day in the desert, I would listen to music or audio books, just because there's like nothing to look at. Most of the time, it's just completely flat. Everyone has this image of the deserts of, oh, these wonderful sand dunes, but honestly, then they don't pop up very often. And sometimes there are a few rocky sections, and now and again, actually around the rocky sections, there were actually loads of tiny flowers. And I was like, wow, I can't believe this is the desert. But most of the time it was just pure, flat, sandy nothingness, which is really difficult for your mind, especially when you have headwind. Like, it was really a struggle. And yeah, at one point, as I was entering Laayoune, the capital of Western Sahara, I broke my headphones. And even though I knew it was only like 2 more hours, I was like, oh, this is too much to do without music. So yeah, it was really a struggle. But I had really good interactions with people during the desert. I think mostly because they thought I was completely insane. But some of the truck drivers coming the other way would beep me or wave at me to keep me going. And I met different people. So I would stop at petrol stations to buy food because there wasn't that many other options. Sometimes there would be a restaurant or a little cafe attached to a petrol station. So every time you saw one, you were like, okay, I have to stop to fill up my water, to buy some snacks. And this one time I met a car full of ladies and then their male relatives. They were going to a wedding. It was actually a little bit of a sinister time because I think a few days before there were 2 Scandinavian hikers that had been killed in the Atlas Mountains. And so it spread around the whole of Morocco, and Moroccan friends I'd made had been texting me, checking I was fine. So these ladies saw me and they were like, oh, what are you doing by yourself? Do you not? I mean, they couldn't speak French, but we managed to kind of communicate because I don't speak Arabic, just a few words. So we were managing to communicate, but they were basically saying like, be careful. And they invited me to eat breakfast with them, and we took pictures together, and it was like a really nice moment. And I took one of their numbers because I think one of their brothers or cousins could speak some French or some English. So then afterwards we sent some messages back and forth. But there were just so many stories like this of really wonderful people that I met along the way, and the desert was particularly strong for that.
What kind of music were you listening to?
All kinds of things. So basically there was 2 albums that I really loved, that actually I think my girlfriend had bought and I'd put on my MP3 player before. So one was George Ezra and the other one was Ex Ambassadors. And I can't think the amount of times that I listened to those 2 albums like again and again and again. But then I also had like full albums of musicals like Joseph and His Technicolor Dreamcoat and Les Miserables and all kinds of stuff. So it just really depended on my mood. I was trying to listen to an audiobook that was called A Woman's Journey Around the World, I think from the 1800s. But because it was recorded by volunteers, the sound quality wasn't that high. And when it was windy in the desert, I just couldn't hear it well enough. So sometimes I just had music playing and also some R&B stuff. Yeah, it depended on my mood, what kind of music I wanted to listen to keep me going.
What are the border crossings like?
Yeah, so I actually didn't have too many problems at border crossings. That was one of my main fears during this trip. It wasn't the nicest border crossing between Western Sahara, which is technically controlled by Morocco, and Mauritania. So I cycle up to it. Oh goodness, I forgot about this. Basically, I cycled through a sandstorm to get to the border with Mauritania, which was absolutely demoralizing. So I finally arrive, and there's a queue of like 100 different lorries that are queuing up, or trucks that are queuing up to cross the border. So I can walk through as I'm a bicycle rather than having to queue up. But there was just no one in the office and everyone was getting angry and stuff. But eventually I managed to get my passport because they were saying, oh, it's too late for you to cross. And I said, no, I'm gonna keep going. Between that border and Mauritania, because of conflicts present and in the past, there's actually, I think it's more than it's a few kilometers of no man's land. So the first bit is tarmac, but the second bit is just giant rocks and sand. And so I was a bit worried about this, and I'd read lots of different people's blog posts about it in the past. But basically I realized that you just follow where you wait until there's cars and then you follow where they're driving. And it's really obvious where the tracks are. Because the thing is, in this no man's land section, there are still landmines, but there are these different paths that people drive that are fine. And actually a really crazy moment that happened in that no man's land was I had all these water pouches. So I had extra water, and one of them, because it was so bumpy, it kind of bounced off my bike. So I stop in the middle of no man's land, like with landmines, however, hopefully hundreds of meters away. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to waste this water. So I got the pouch, it got a hole in it. So I just decant the water into a water bottle, take a deep breath, go, okay, let's have a look where these are looking into the distance, go, okay, where are the cars? Okay, sure, I'll follow. And then at one point, actually, I stopped and asked a car that was coming the other way, which route should I go? And they were really helpful. And then I got to the Mauritanian side. That was also fine. I had decided to buy my Mauritanian visa in advance because for the last year you were able to buy one on the border, but I didn't really want to take that risk. So I decided to buy mine in advance in Rabat, the capital of Morocco. So then that went quite smoothly. I arrived at the border post. Everyone was having lunch. So I just waited for a little bit, but then it wasn't too long until I crossed the border. Yeah, most of the other borders were fine, actually. The only one that I'd been told about in advance that is quite bad for corruption was crossing into Sierra Leone. And I almost had a situation, but the immigration guy kind of didn't think quick enough. So with that visa, I'd bought it online. Sierra Leone now has a tourism website where you can buy the visa online, and then they email it to you, and you print out the document and you give it to the border post. So I did everything. Everything was fine. I leave the office, and then as a second thought, the immigration man says, "Oh, do you have documents for your bike?" Which is something I'd read about in this other guy's blog who'd cycled through Southern Africa. And because I built my bike myself, of course, I don't have proof of purchase. So I just look at the immigration guy and I say, "What documents?" And I could see his mind was like, and he just didn't really reply quick enough. So I just left, and he never said anything again. And as I was leaving, then other immigration people wanted to ask me questions, but it was, to be honest, it was more because they were interested in who I was or what I was doing rather than any kind of corruption reasons. And people told me the police are really corrupt in Sierra Leone, but I guess I feel personally that as I was a foreigner, I wasn't affected by that, which is a weird situation because you would think that I would be. But anyways, I actually made friends with the policeman, but that's a different story. It was at this roadblock, and I had to ask him how to get down to the river because I really wanted to have a wash. And then in the end, I ended up actually in that situation. The police weren't massively helpful, but other people in the village helped me find somewhere to stay, and then I stayed in that night. But the kind of roadblock actually that policeman was working at, there was like 3 different types of police. One was kind of FBI style, others were kind of traffic police and all kinds of stuff. And those are the kind of places that I think average like Sierra Leoneans that are crossing through the country have to pay bribes at all the time.
In Mauritania, there's a story about having to jump onto a train. It sounded kind of dangerous. What was that whole train thing about?
I mean, I didn't have to jump onto the train. It was of my own free will. So I'd read about this train. So it's a freight train that carries iron ore from in the desert, in the Sahara Desert, west to the coast of Mauritania to a port called Nouadhibou, where then it's put on boats, I'm assuming, and sent to different places around the world. So I'd read about different kind of backpackers that had jumped on this train. And then I was writing in a few cycle touring forums, I guess, asking if anyone had ever done it with a bike, and a few people said yes. I was in Nouadhibou on Christmas Day. I paid for a hotel, and I was like chilling and having a solo Christmas day in a Muslim country where no one else was celebrating Christmas. Although in the afternoon it was really sweet. This man in the hotel said Happy Christmas in French to me, so that was nice. So I decided, okay, cool. We call it Boxing Day in the UK, so the 26th of December, I'm going to get on that train. So I cycled to the station. I actually had a very interesting interaction. So from talking to the station man, I believe that quite a few other cycle tourists do this. And he was basically having a go not necessarily at me, but having a go at like European cycle tourists, kind of taking advantage of this train because it is free to travel on. And there's all of these porters milling around trying to help people with their stuff. Because the train, I mean, I don't even know how high it is. You have to climb up a ladder that's at least 3 or 4 meters high and lift all your stuff up. So basically, in the end, this porter that was hanging around, I said, sure, like, you can help me and I'll give you a tip for helping me to put my stuff onto the train. Because Mauritania has like a massive amount of unemployment. And it seemed from these stories that lots of cyclists that are trying to, I say lots, I mean, I don't think that many cyclists put their bike on the train, but they just rely on the kindness of other people around them. Of course, other people around helped, but at least I gave this porter like a job for that moment. So yeah, so he helped me get the bike and all of my luggage onto the train and climb down inside. I am so glad about the carriage that I got into because basically everybody on the train was male, like a young male that was essentially going to the mine to work. But the carriage I got into, there was this lady called Khadija that I made friends with. And she was traveling with her brother and with a little boy who might have been her son, I'm not sure, and with an older man. And then we also had 3 younger guys who were going to work at the mine. So it was such a nice environment. So it's basically, just imagine like a metal freight train, like open carriage that is going to the mine to then be filled with iron ore to go back the other way. One of the guys that were going to work at the mine, they shared their blanket with me because it was winter in the desert, so obviously it's still hot, but at night it was absolutely freezing, and the wind blowing into this carriage, or not carriage, this I don't even know what to call it, open top thing, was just unbearable. So everyone was sleeping with their heads covered and like shivering together. And Khadija said, "Do you want to lie next to me?" So they had this mat that we were lying on. And the 3 guys in the corner were making some tea, so they shared that around, and I shared my dates. Although it was really funny, in Morocco people love dates, but in Mauritania, Khadija was saying, "I don't want to eat these dates, like they're really bad for your teeth," which is a very good point because they are very sugary. But anyways, everyone took some of the dates. So I'm so glad that I made friends with the people in that train carriage, because when I needed to get off, I wasn't going all the way to the mine. I was getting off at a town called Choum, which is Choum. And then going to a place called Attar, where there's huge mountains. It's really beautiful. From reading different people's blogs, knew the estimate of the time that the train would arrive, which was 3 a.m. in the morning, which was initially why I was skeptical about getting this train and arriving in the middle of the night. But I did that, and luckily one of the men was awake, and then one of the 3 other guys woke up. So when we stopped, they managed to help me get all my stuff off the train, because it only stops for a few minutes. So I was so glad for their help. In the end, I decided to put my bike and everything on top of this minibus that was going to Attar, because it was dark, and I was like, I'm not going to cycle in the dark. Like, Mauritania now is a relatively safe country, but in the past that road was really dangerous, and I thought, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm just going to get this transport. However, another woman I met on the way called Farah, who has a blog called Brown Girl on a Bike, and she's just gone back to Senegal and is continuing her journey through West Africa like I did. So she actually cycled from the end of that. She got off the train in Choum and started cycling towards Attar, which I thought was completely mad. But anyways, look up what she's doing. She's cycling in Senegal at the moment. Brown Girl on a Bike. So yeah, so then I arrived in Attar as the sun is rising, and yeah, then I checked into a camping place and stayed there for a while. It actually worked out quite well, because this place is kind of an overland. You know, those people that drive through Africa on kind of 4x4s, all these big trucks and stuff. So lots of those people were staying there. So then the next few days, I actually went out with a few of them, like into the sand dunes in a 4x4 and other places around where there were these mountain ranges. So I'm glad that I took that detour to get on the train and go inland in Mauritania, because otherwise I wouldn't have gone on the longest train in the world. And I wouldn't have seen kind of inland Mauritania, as most people's cycle blogs that I've read, they just go along the coast. So they're missing out on the train and on the inland bit. So I was really glad of my last minute decision to get on that train. It was really one of the highlights from my trip.
What did those overlanders think about how you were traveling? Did they think you were crazy?
Oh my God, they thought I was completely mad. because obviously they have the security of their vehicle. They have so much food. They had so much luggage, like you can't believe. But they also, yeah, obviously they thought I was amazing. I guess it was a double whammy of like, you're riding a bicycle in Mauritania and you're a woman by yourself, etc. All of the usual questions. Are you not scared? Blah, blah, blah. But there was a group of 4 men actually. So 2 of them are from Western Sahara and 2 of them are French. So they were friends from back home in France, and they were traveling together, and I made really good friends with them, and I'm still in contact with them. So it was nice to hang out with people that became friends kind of around Christmas time and New Year's. Yeah, it was funny to talk to them, and I guess it made me realize like what I was doing and how, yeah, I guess like a great achievement it is. Another nice moment actually. So then I cycled from Attar to Nouakchott, which is the capital of Mauritania. Cycling along. By this point, I'm a bit like, I'm fed up of the desert. It was getting hotter and hotter because actually in Morocco and Western Sahara, because it was the winter, the temperatures weren't actually that hot. It wasn't humid, and because of the wind, the temperature didn't seem so intense. But in Mauritania, it was really getting hot. So I'm cycling along. I can't remember on which of the days, and this car passes. I'm assuming it's like a group of tourists, probably French tourists potentially, or from another European country. And there's like 2 or 3 women in the car. And I think they see me in the distance, so they roll down their windows and they just pass me, just clapping and going like, bravo, wow, that's so amazing. And it just really made me smile for such a long time. I'm not even sure if they realized that I was a woman, because I had a meeting with these 2 French camper van drivers in Western Sahara, and I asked them, so it was a horrible windy day, and they invited me to drink coffee in their caravan. I said, sure, I'm exhausted. And I said, you know what, can I ask you a question? Because I had the sand scarf, you couldn't see my hair because I have long blonde hair, so it's obviously otherwise quite obvious that I'm a woman. But I said, with my sand scarf, could you tell that I was a woman? And they said, you know what, we looked at you and we weren't sure, because I'm quite like slim in build, but also a male cycle tourist could be the same, like a similar looking build. And they said they didn't know. So I'm not sure if people that saw me along the way actually knew my gender, which is kind of a good and a bad thing. A bad thing, I guess, because I want to be visible as a female cycle touring by herself. But in Mauritania, this is not really accepted. Like lots of Mauritanian women I met were like, I'd love to ride a bicycle, but I would get harassed. People would like shout at me and make me stop riding the bike. I guess often as a foreigner, you kind of get this special pass of, okay, she's not from here, so it's allowed in her country. It's different. But then on the plus side, sometimes, especially after this attack of the 2 women in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, I was maybe sometimes glad that people didn't know I was a woman. And actually, yeah, often people didn't know, because people would say, oh, monsieur, like, because they were French-speaking countries. And I'd say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm actually madame, I'm not monsieur.
Do you speak French?
Yeah, I speak French. So a lot of people in the UK don't know a lot of languages. I learned French at school, but it was only the last few years because I was visiting France, and I used to live in Belgium, in Brussels, where they speak French, and I was in Switzerland, so I got to practice my French over the last few years. But so in Morocco, in the beginning, it was a little bit sketchy, but it just like got better and better and better because so few people speak English. I mean, why would they? Like, Morocco was colonized by France, so their first language would be Arabic, and then their second language would be French. Although a lot of people that I met were Berber, so their first language is a Berber language, second language Arabic, third language French. So why would anyone be able to speak English? So my French like massively improved, and I really liked it that I was able to talk to so many more people from being able to speak French, because a majority of West African countries were colonized by France. So therefore, as a legacy, still learn French in school. Obviously, not everybody can speak French as a second or third language. It all depends if you've been to school or not. Yeah, I think that stopped me from getting lonely, being able to have like even just small conversations with people along the way, and to describe to them what I was doing.
After Mauritania, you end up in Senegal, and I have in my notes here that you had some great times there, but this is also, I believe, where you injured your knee. What do you want to talk about in terms of your time in Senegal?
I ended up spending almost a month in Senegal, which is quite a small country. And yeah, I had some really great times, but also some very difficult times. I crossed the border from Mauritania to Senegal. That's where I broke my first spoke on my wheel. I was like, oh my goodness me. I rode for about 50 more kilometers on a broken spoke. I realized on this journey, so people tell you, okay, it's good practice to change a broken spoke as soon as you break it. However, on this trip, once I cycled 100 kilometers with a broken spoke on an unpaved road because I didn't have a cassette removal tool, and the spoke broke on the cassette side. So anyway, so I carried on riding to the city of Saint Louis in Senegal. I stayed with a really nice organization that I'd met through couch surfing. They helped me find a mechanic so I could get a cassette removal tool and change the spoke. So I had a really great time in Saint Louis. So then I cycled a little bit in the kind of northeast of, or north of Senegal. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to visit Lac Rose, which is this pink lake because of all the salt that's in it. So I'd almost arrived there, I was having a great time, really excited. I'd almost got to Dakar, which was my kind of big first milestone. And then I was on quite a small road, but it was busy, and there was this bus station and taxi station. So basically what happened was this taxi overtook me and then turned straight in front of me. And because of the weight on my bike, I braked, but I couldn't stop, and I crashed into the back of him. So he'd actually turned across me, so I crashed into the back of the taxi. So I fell down, and I think I must have hit my knee on my steel frame. So I was like, ouch, that hurts. All of my stuff had been scattered across the road. People were so nice. It was like my purse, my phone, my water bottles, everyone collected it and brought it back to me. And these ladies were saying, I don't know why they were saying thank you, but they were like, thank you. I think they were trying to express that they were sorry and were checking I was okay. So I said, yeah, I'm fine. My knee hurts a bit, but I carried on. So I cycled on to Lac Rose. That evening, I went across the other side of the lake to this music festival. And so around the lake, there's all of this sand. And so I managed to walk there, and I realized, oh my goodness, I've really hurt my knee. I can't walk back. And luckily there was a guy that had a car that was driving around the other side of the lake to where I was staying. So then only the next morning did I decide to find some ice and to ice my knee. But I thought, okay, I'm almost in Dakar. I was like 40 kilometers away from Dakar, so I just keep riding. But honestly, every time I pushed down my pedal, my knee hurt. And I was thinking, this is not great. But, it will fix itself. So I cracked on. I stayed with a French couple from a website called Warm Showers, which is like couch surfing, but for cyclists. So you can stay in someone's place for free. I stayed with a lot of people from Warm Showers, but they were mostly foreigners living in a foreign country. So then I visit some place in Dakar. I visit Gorée Island, which is really famous. It has a lot of history to do with the slave trade, and now it has a lot of Rasta artists and musicians. So I visited there. I'm thinking my knee's still not fixed. I move the Warm Showers person I'm staying with. I go stay with another French man who's called Julien, and he was so kind. And basically I stayed with him for a week, realizing my knee is not getting better. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I had to wait there for a bit. So basically it took a good 3 weeks for my knee to get better. So I was staying with him. I went to the Gambia to go on a little holiday because I really planned for my girlfriend to come and visit. So at least that gave me time for my knee to heal. But I was really thinking, oh my goodness, I actually at one point when I was moving my stuff across Dakar to get to Julien's place, I just started crying whilst I was riding because I was like, you know what, my aim of getting to Ghana is over. It's not going to happen. Fortunately, I have lots of medically trained friends at home. So I was sending them messages, asking them advice, and they said, you just have to wait and rest it. So luckily, after about 3 weeks, it seemed okay. And I decided, okay, I can start riding again. But I was really scared of cycling out of Dakar because it's such a busy city and I just didn't want to get hit again. So it was in Dakar that I met Farah, whose blog is Brown Girl on a Bike. So she was having a break, but she decided that she would cycle with me for one day out of Dakar. So that was a really good boost to my mood. And I felt much better to be cycling with her just for that one day. And then afterwards I carried on. But then I had another little setback, which was definitely on the cards and was meant to be because my knee wasn't quite fixed. It was still hurting me. I was still really scared of traffic around me because, for example, this man was driving past me and then he sees his friend to the left. So he starts going, oh, hey, friend. And he starts just veering towards me to stop his car and then talk to the friend. And so this kind of stuff kept happening. So I go to this famous place called Fadouth, which is an island made of shells. And on the way, this man called David was riding on his motorbike, and he goes, "Oh, hello, cyclist." I'm like, "Oh, hello." He said, "Would you like to have lunch with me and my family?" I'm like, "Sure." So he got me onto the island without having to pay the tourist tax, because there's also all of these guides that want to take you around. He was like, "No, I'm her guide." I ended up staying with him for about 5 days because I broke my phone whilst I was there. And as I said before, I was navigating using my phone. Also, I didn't have any fancy equipment like a camera or anything. So I couldn't navigate. I couldn't take pictures of anything. I couldn't contact home. So I said, okay, I'm going to try and fix my phone here. But as it was a really small place, it took a very long time to find someone that could fix it. And then they had to send away for parts. It was a blessing in disguise, because actually that extra time for my knee to heal was definitely needed. And whilst I was there, so basically there's a massive delta in Senegal called the Sini Saloum, which I was looking at the map and going, wow, this looks amazing. So the only options are that you cycle all the way around the outside a bit, which kind of doubles the distance. Or, now I didn't know if it was possible, but I was like, you know what? I thought I wasn't even going to make it to Ghana, so let's just try anything. So I decided to cycle a bit from Fadouth to a port that now I've forgotten the name of, and try and get 2 different boats across the mangroves to the other side, close to the border with Gambia. So whilst I was staying with David and his family on the Shell Island, I was talking to some of his friends and family, and we were deciding, is it possible? No one really knew if I was going to be able to get the boats all the way across, but they knew that I would be able to get to one island in the middle. So I was like, sure. So I managed to get on a boat going to that island. I missed the charter ferry one because it was full by the time I got there. So I had to pay a separate boat guy for his like boat as a private journey. But actually it turned out well, because then he said, "Where are you staying on the island?" I said, "I don't know." So I stayed in his family house, and he was so helpful. He found out that there was a night ferry. I say ferry, sorry, I'm talking about a long wooden fishing boat, but there was a night one going across the Sydney Saloum Delta, getting close to the border with Gambia. So he had to go back and work, but his little brother helped me get to the boat. So this was kind of a wider, very deep wooden boat. So they helped me get on with my bike and everything. And basically I lay at the bottom of that boat, going through the mangroves with 1 million stars above. And I was like, I'm so glad that I endeavored on this crazy crossing the Delta ambition, not knowing that it would be possible. And it was. Basically, one main thing that I met on this journey is people are so, especially in villages, people are so nice, and people helped me out so much, fed me so much food. And from the journey I'd had already up to that point, I knew, you know what, like, it's definitely possible. I'll make it possible to cross over. Of course, there's people that live on this delta on the island, so sure, there's going to be boats. But I don't know whether at the start of the trip, whether I would have had the same mentality. Like, definitely during the trip, my mentality changed. So I did this other amazing moment of going on a night boat across the delta. And then another thing happened of we arrived at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I was like, goodness me, what do I do? So I was just deciding to sleep by the little port, and this guy comes over and said, "Madame, please don't do that. It's dangerous. Everyone's leaving now." So then I went and stayed in his friend's house, slept for a few hours, and then carried on my journey.
Let's fast forward a bit in the journey and head into Sierra Leone, where now this is what I'm interested in is you meet up with another one of these kind of bicycle projects, the Village Bicycle Project. Tell me about that.
During my trip, I wanted to try and visit different bicycle projects that were doing things along the way. So there's actually another one I visited in Gambia called YC, which is YWCE, that people can look up if they want to. They also donate bikes to children that live really far away from their school and have to walk like 5 or 8 miles to school. So having a bicycle really cuts that journey. So the Village Bicycle Project is doing the same thing. They donate bicycles to Sierra Leone and Ghana, and they're actually based in the US. So for your listeners, this could be helpful. If you have a bicycle that you want to donate somewhere, look up the Village Bicycle Project in the US. I don't know which state it's based in, but they collect loads of bikes and ship them over. So I met up with the Village Bicycle Project in Lunsa and learnt about what they're doing, and visited some of the different projects. that they've donated bikes to. So mostly secondary school students. That some of them I spoke to, they were walking 8 miles each way to get to school. So they were having to wake up at like 4 a.m. in the dark, get ready for school, start walking for hours and hours and hours, go to school, and then do exactly the same thing the other end. So the guy that runs the Village Bicycle Project in Sierra Leone, in Lunsa, his nickname is Stylish. His name is Karim. And so he's also set up a bicycle shop, and he's training young people how to be mechanics, and then they're also selling bikes and stuff to keep it all going. And as an individual, from the money of his salary from the Village Bicycle Project, he also does school feeding programs and stuff as well. Like, was a really great person to meet. So so on my blog, I wrote a whole blog just about this project because I was so amazed in what they're doing, and especially Karim, all the work that he's done for this project.
So other than the injuring your knee, were there any other times that you were sick or anything?
So I actually didn't really get sick that many times. Most of it was before Mauritania. So I had like food poisoning that I think I caused myself in Morocco, and just some other like digestive related things. I guess one time in Côte d'Ivoire, I thought I had malaria, but I realized it was literally just heat exhaustion. So I stopped for like a day and a half. I booked into a guest house and just rested. Another question that people always assume, and from other cycle blogs I've read, is people getting stuff stolen. So the whole time, often I would just like leave my bike somewhere. It would be in sight, but I would go away, buy some food, come back, or someone would offer to watch it. But I remember my mum asking me, "Oh, what do you do when I was in Spain, when I go into a cafe?" And I said, "Oh, I just leave my stuff outside." Like, obviously I wasn't irresponsible. I could always see my bike and I would always check on it, but I never got like anything stolen. Literally the only thing that happened, which was quite funny, was, so I had this big food bag on the back, and these little kids in the Anti-Atlas Mountains, they were like, "Hey, come over here and look at this donkey," because before they were asking me for sweets, and I said, "No, sorry, I don't have some." And in Morocco, you can buy all these little chocolate bars for 1 dirham, which is like nothing. I can't remember the exchange rate. And so the only thing I got stolen the whole trip was from those little kids, and they stole like 3 of my chocolate bars. That was it. And it was funny because I didn't realize until the next day, and I was really tired, and I stopped and I go, "Oh yeah, I'm going to have that chocolate bar that's like a Twix." And then I realized, oh, those little kids. But I just think it's such a sweet story because literally like nothing else bad happened during my whole trip apart from getting a chocolate bar stolen, which obviously at the time I was like, damn it, I really want that chocolate bar. But yeah, that's the worst thing that happened.
During your adventure, you keep having problems with your wheel, with spokes breaking and so on. How difficult was it to find a mechanic to try to fix these problems?
Basically, before I left, my mechanic friends were saying, "I really think that you should take a cassette removal tool." And I decided not to. I was like, "No, sure, it'll be fine. I'll find people on the way that can help me." So the first time that my spoke broke and I got to Saint Louis in Senegal, and I was like, "Sure, I can change it myself." But I can change spokes. I built my bike, so I know mechanics. But the problem was that this spoke had broken on the cassette side, which basically means you have to take the cassette off before you can change the spoke. So stupidly, because I'd fixed everything up until that point, I was like, "Oh my goodness, how am I going to change this spoke?" And then I suddenly realized, oh, sure, I can find a mechanic. So I found a really good mechanic in Senegal who had all the stuff, like really old school tools, but he had everything to remove the cassette. I was carrying my own spokes of the right size, so then I gave him the spoke and he changed it, and it was all great. From then onwards, though, it was extremely difficult. So there's lots of like informal bike mechanics, but they don't have all the tools. So they have like spanners and stuff. I mean, I had a spanner. I had Allen keys, or Allen wrenches, maybe you call them in the US. I had this kind of stuff, but the only thing I always needed was a cassette removal tool, which no one has. So my DIY skills of getting a cassette off without having a cassette removal tool are now like through the roof, because every person I found that was kind of a mechanic or looked like one, I would often like talk them through, okay, so we need to get this off. We need to find something that's the right size to like wedge in the cassette, and we need to turn it. So often it didn't work. There was 2 amazing little boys. I don't know how old the youngest one was. The oldest one was no older than 14, and he was looking after the shop for his dad. I think I offended him actually, because I was like, oh, where's your adult person? And he was like, no, I'm running the shop. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. But anyways, those two little boys managed to remove another spoke that had broken on the cassette side without taking off the cassette, which basically means contorting this like thin piece of metal, which is the spoke, and getting out and then getting the new one in. Like, it was incredible. So I had a lot of encounters, maybe like 7 or 8 times, where I met different like mechanics and tried to fix stuff with them. But often the problem was people said they were bike mechanics, but actually they were motorbike mechanics and thought that they knew about bike mechanics. But depending on the country, depending on how many bicycles there were, people had differing levels of knowledge. So for example, like in Senegal and in Côte d'Ivoire, which from my opinion are the more affluent countries in the region, there were lots of bikes, therefore more people that knew how to fix bikes. But in Liberia, I enter the country, I realize I have a broken spoke again from a really bad road crossing the border from Sierra Leone to Liberia. And I see that absolutely nobody is riding a bike. And I'm like, oh goodness me, how is this going to end up? Which was not very well, to be honest. I went to 2 different mechanics. The first one, in the end, I said, please stop working on my bike, because he really didn't know what he was doing. And the second one had all the tools and stuff. He said to me, actually, did I want to fix my bike? But I was like, well, that's not fair, because this is his job. So I was like, no, I'm going to pay you to fix it. But in the end, he said that because he didn't really know what he was doing. And so then he put all kinds of weird oil in my bike, which later clogged up the freewheel. Sorry if this is a bit too technical for non-cycling people, but basically I was in Liberia and my back wheel essentially breaks, so I can pedal forwards and backwards, which you shouldn't be able to do on a bike when it's moving. So in that case, there was no one that had the tools. There was this little kid that they called Grandpa that knew some bike mechanics that he taught himself, and he was really great, but he just couldn't fix it, because also I didn't properly understand that was the problem, that there was all this muck inside the freewheel. So then I go on this other crazy adventure of we strap my bike and my luggage to a motorbike that then I travel on as well, and we cross the border into Côte d'Ivoire, because my prediction was, like with Senegal, that Côte d'Ivoire would have more people riding bicycles and therefore more mechanic people, which in the end luckily was true. So he managed to fix the wheel, and then I could continue. Because I was getting towards the end then. Côte d'Ivoire is the neighbouring country to Ghana, so I was like, I'm so close, but I'm so far, because my pedals weren't turning the back wheel, so I wasn't able to go forward. But luckily I was able to fix it in a city called Man. Then ironically, I leave Man, and it had been raining loads, so loads of rubbish from the sides of the road had gone onto the road, and I get a puncture within like 10 minutes, because also my pump had finally broken because it got so clogged full of sand during the desert times, and I tried to clean it and fix it, but in the end it just wasn't happening. Sorry, a little bit technical again, but my inner tubes had Presta valves, and there are a lot of mountain bikes in Africa which have different valves, so the pump that I was able to buy actually wouldn't fit my valve and inflate my inner tube. So yeah, but I met some other people again who helped me to put air in my tires, and yeah, it just turned into a constant thing of, oh goodness, there's another problem with my bike. I don't have the tools. I'm going to have to find somebody again. So that became quite mentally tiring, even though it was really nice to meet all these people with their small businesses of fixing bikes and talking to them and stuff. But yeah, by the time I got to Côte d'Ivoire, I was really quite tired, like mentally. And then also physically, because the humidity was just insane. And that's, as I said before, when I thought I had malaria, but I realized I just had like heat exhaustion. Going back a little bit to Sierra Leone. So when I went to visit the Village Bicycle Project, I was absolutely pooped. I was so tired. And then I check on the internet of what the temperature is, and it's 40 degrees centigrade. With humidity. So I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, which you use in the US, but like so unbelievably hot. And I was having to drink like 5 litres of water a day just to keep myself going. I probably needed to take in more, but it was just tricky to get like carry that much water and take it all in. And so actually, of all the sections of the trip, physically, I found sub-Saharan Africa in tropical humidity, like very difficult to ride through.
You finally make it to Ghana. What was that final section like before you got to your friend's house? How far did you have to go? How far did you have to ride through Ghana?
I think it was something like 500 kilometers. So I'd had all kinds of plans before that I didn't want to cycle along the busy coastal road because I've been to Ghana before and I know the levels of traffic and I didn't want to do it. But I really wanted my mum to come and visit me in Ghana because she's the reason why I met Aisha. And she wanted to meet Aisha, my friend, brothers and stuff. So my mum could come sooner than I wanted her to, I guess, in a sense. So I wasn't able to go a nicer, more inland route. So I was like, okay, that's just how it is. I'll cycle along the coast. It will mean that I'll get to visit places that I visited. The last time I went to Ghana was in 2012. The western region of Ghana, which is next to the border with Côte d'Ivoire, is not as populated as other sections. However, they have recently resurfaced the road, so it was really wonderful. However, the rainy season was coming and my welcome to Ghana was like a giant rainstorm with thunder and lightning and wind that I had to stop and hide in a petrol station for about 3 hours to let it pass. And there was no sun because the cloud was so thick and I was like, oh my goodness, the rainy season is here. Am I going to be able to get to Accra, the capital of Ghana, in time? But luckily then it went back to being sunny and there was only little sections of rain, so I was able to get there. So in Western region, it was wonderful because the road was a really good surface. It was wide. There was even a side kind of hard shoulder section that people were riding their bicycles on. So I was having a great time. But as I get further along the coast, so there's a big city called Cape Coast, which has lots of historical monuments linked to the slave trade. So lots of tourists go and visit there. And even before, actually, there's a place called Axim. So kind of in the middle of the coastline, it started getting so busy. The road was getting narrower. The surface of the road wasn't even that good because there's so many trucks that are traveling over it. And I just was like, I can't wait to get to Accra. So yeah, and it was also really hot. Finally I made it. It took just like hours and hours to cycle across Accra. I don't know what the population is, but there's like definitely millions of people that live there. And my friend Aisha lives on the east side of the city and I was coming in from the west side. So I cycled about 40 kilometers of urban sprawl. I just had not the most safest thing to do, but I just put my headphones in playing a British Ghanaian artist called Fuse ODG. I was like, okay, I'm just going to listen to him. I'm going to get through the city. It's all going to be fine. But then it was nice in the center of the city because then I saw landmarks that I'd recognized from previous visits to Accra. And that was nice. And I had like celebratory photos taken next to like Independence Arch and stuff. And then I got to Aisha's house. But unfortunately, because since the last time I saw her, she's got a very important job now. She's the director of West Africa for an agribusiness company. So she actually wasn't even in Ghana, which was really sad. I'd done this whole trip to like arrive in Accra and to see her. But her younger brother, who I've met before, he was there. So he picked me up and then I went to their house and just slept and rested for a few days. And then I did a little bit more of the journey because when I went to Ghana before, I have friends in Volta region, which is on the east inland side of Ghana. So I went there and visited different friends. And so by the time I came back to Accra, then I'd also finally finished with the tally of 10,000 kilometers. So that was great. A new friend that I made and an old friend whose project I was visiting. So he's called Daniel. He lives in the town of Ho and his charity is called Kickstart Ghana. He's a long-time football player and coach and he's getting kids in the area to get into sport to empower themselves. So he's great. His charity is Kickstart Ghana. And then another woman I met by accident. So one of Daniel's friends, who's a sports presenter, she interviewed me on her sports radio station. And she told me about this woman called Vida, who lived on the way that I was about to cycle to get back to Accra. So I met her and she's so inspirational. So when she was about 20 years old, she cycled almost the length of the Volta region, which is hundreds of kilometers, by herself. I think that was like in the 80s or the 90s or something. So everyone thought she was completely mad. What's this girl doing cycling by herself? And since then, she set up her own charity, which is called Vida Cycling Program, which is VIDA. And she's encouraging girls to cycle because there's a lot of football happening in Ghana. Lots of boys are encouraged to play football, but there's no cycling and definitely there's not cycling for girls. So she's had different people donating bikes to her, I think, from Germany and other European countries. And then she built her own cycling track, just her and her son helping her a bit. So she has kind of biathlon. So they have a running race and then they have a cycling race. She was a really amazing woman to meet. And I stayed with her. She let me stay the night with her. And so then I wake up in the morning with Vida, and then I do my last day of cycling to finally arrive in Accra and have cycled 10,000 kilometers. So that was a really wonderful last day. But by the time I arrived in the hot and dirty and dusty city, I was like, okay, I'm done. Let's stop now. And then I started to visit other friends I have in Accra.
What was your favorite part of the adventure?
There's so many highlights, and a few of them I've already spoken about, like the going on the train in Mauritania, the crossing the Delta in the boat in Senegal. The desert was amazing. But I think my other highlights were specific moments I had with women that I think I wouldn't have experienced if I was a male cyclist traveling by myself. So one of them was back in Morocco. And it's so funny because if I did this in the UK, people would say I was trespassing on their land. So I was on a main road and I'm trying to find a house that I can knock on the door of and ask to stay at, which is what I did throughout Morocco and then the other countries past that. So I turn off to the side and I cycle through some farmland. I knock on a few different doors. No one's answering. I'm thinking, oh God, maybe I just camp in the olive groves, but I didn't really want to. I preferred during my whole trip to always stay near people and for people to know that I was there, because I didn't want to be woken up in the middle of the night by somebody going, who on earth are you? So I knock on the door of this house. This lady opens the door, which is usually what happened in Morocco because it wasn't dark yet. So their husbands and male family members were outside of the house. I had the sentence in Arabic, can I put my tent next to your house? She goes back inside, has a little discussion with her sister, like, my goodness, what do we do with this person? And then eventually they invite me in. They treated me so well. They gave me loads of biscuits and tea. They asked me what I wanted to eat, what I wanted to drink. This is like a small farmhouse, like not rich people by any measure. They had their own hammam bath in their courtyard. So I guess some people know about, typically sometimes called Turkish baths, where you go in and it's a hot room and you're cleaned and stuff. So the mum gave me a hammam bath in their little hut in the courtyard. They gave me pajamas to wear. They wrapped my head in a headscarf, which they were saying was like Sahara style, because there's different ways of wrapping your hair. And then to top it all off, the mum says, you're going to sleep in my bed. So her husband slept in the living room. She was like in her 60s. She slept on the floor and I slept in her bed. And I was saying to her, no, please, like, we can sleep in the bed together. And she's like, absolutely not. I'm sleeping on the floor. You're sleeping in the bed. I felt so bad, but I just couldn't believe the hospitality that these women showed to this random, probably scary stranger that had just like randomly knocked on their door and changed their whole evening. And this happened loads of times with women in Morocco. And another highlight was, I briefly mentioned a bit of it. So in Sierra Leone, when I asked at this police roadblock if they could show me where the river was. So I went down to the river and there were all these little girls and little boys around. And so I said to them, hi, I'm traveling on my bike. I'm just going to go and have a wash in the river. And they said, sure, we can show you, we can help you find the bits of the river to go into, because it was quite shallow. So all the little boys, it was really sweet. They actually stayed on the shore and only the little girls came with me. And we kind of walked to the bit of the river that was a bit deeper. We all kind of swam around together and they were really like fascinated with me, like wanting to touch my white skin, which I totally understand because maybe they'd never seen a white person before. And it was just this like really magical moment, which especially in that situation, that never would have happened. Maybe if I was a male cycle tourist, little boys might have joined me in the river, but it was so wonderful. And one of the little girls took my sandals and she started cleaning them, which actually lots of other people did during the trip because they were so covered in muck. And it was just so wonderful. And maybe the sweetest thing was, so they helped me to push my bike back up to the road because it was really steep to go down. And then I turn around to say thank you and they've already disappeared. They just were like, sure, we'll help this person. And now we're just going to continue with our days and play. I just thought it was so, so wonderful.
You carried a ukulele with you a long way. How often did you get a chance to use that?
So I didn't actually play it as much as I had imagined, but often people who I asked to stay with, often they noticed it. And they said, "Oh, what's that? Is it a guitar?" And I said, "Actually, no, it's a ukulele. It's like a guitar, but smaller and with 4 strings." So then they would ask me to play. But the hilarious thing, I think it was also in Sierra Leone or maybe in Guinea, they said, "Oh, I'll play." But most of the songs I play and sing are ballads. And so they were trying to dance around to my songs. And I felt so embarrassed. Like, I really wish I had a more like upbeat song for you to listen to. But yeah, it was really nice to be able to share something with people, especially if they asked, like, "We want to listen to your music." Often if they didn't ask, I kind of like kept it. And I didn't always feel like playing it. Sometimes I was a bit tired, but yeah, I was really glad that I had it. And actually, when I was in Senegal recovering my knee, then I like played it a lot, and it was helpful. And I wrote like a comedy song about my predicament. So yeah, I'm glad that I carried it. It sparked lots of interest from people.
Yeah, there's a lot of amazing music that comes from that part of the world. You mentioned Mali before you'd been there. I don't know if they're still doing it because I know they've had some issues in that country with safety or whatever. But yeah, I think there used to be a big music festival in Mali.
Yeah, so that's actually why I went there before. I went in January 2012, this time not traveling by bicycle, but I went, it's called Festival au Desert. Probably don't say it right, which they have now stopped, but hopefully in the future they'll be able to do it again. So that was the last year they ran it. And actually, different groups came into the festival site just after everybody had left and ransacked it, and then eventually took over Timbuktu, and all bad things happened from then onwards. But yeah, the thing with Mali actually is the Tuareg people have like a really strong music tradition, and the people that have come into the country, the form of like Sharia law that they're advocating bans music. So people's lives in Mali have massively changed since that whole situation started to happen, and have had to either leave the country or like play their music in private, and I guess probably in fear. For me, Mali has like the best like music culture in West Africa, but other countries of course have like really great music as well, like the kora, which is really hard to describe in words, but imagine like a harp, but it has a big round calabash on one side of it, and then there's like something crazy like 32 or 34 strings that are being played, and there's a really beautiful instrument that I was able to listen to quite a few times in Senegal. And then of course there's all the different drums, and yeah, all along the coast and all through the different countries.
Nikki, what's next for you?
So as I said, for this, as you said actually, I called this trip Ready, Steady, Slow, because I had wanted to go back to West Africa for such a long time, and I really didn't want to rush and to visit places along the way. I still want to do a lot more cycle touring. I think next time I might actually do it a little bit faster, because of my injuries and various other reasons, I took a little bit longer than I had realized that I could have done it a little bit faster. I don't regret the speed that I took the trip. Yeah, so I think the next place I would like to go to is to cycle to Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, not the state, because I used to live there for a year with an English teaching program. So I thought, yeah, I don't know, just to cycle to different places that I have had some link to in the past is nice. I used to live with a family there in a village, so to cycle and go and visit there. And actually it would mean cycling through a lot of European countries that I haven't actually visited, like the southeast of Europe has so many tiny countries like Croatia, Slovenia, Albania, Serbia that I haven't been to. So that would be a good way to go there. But I've also started watching more videos about endurance cycling, which I was really against before. I thought, oh, this is so silly, you miss so many places on the way. But now I realize what my body is able to do. So I'm like tentatively looking at that side of cycling as well. But I will still keep cycle touring in a slow-ish way because of the interactions you have with people along the way and how you really understand a country. Because say when I went to Mali, I flew into Mali and then I went overland to Ghana and then I flew out of Ghana. I feel like I don't understand Mali and Burkina Faso that I went through, as well as like Senegal, other countries that I traveled through on land, on my bicycle, really understanding the culture and the people and the food and like what is sold on the roadside, how everything works. You can get to know a country so much better by traveling by bicycle.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more?
You can contact me through my blog, as Paul from The Pursuit Zone did. So the blog is readysteadyslow.wordpress.com. Send me an email and I'll email you back.
Nikki Ray, thank you so much for coming on the show. Congratulations on this accomplishment and good luck in the future.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for listening. You can find this episode online at thepursuitzone.com/TPZ187. That's TPZ187. The best way to support the podcast is to subscribe and share this episode with your friends. You'll find subscription links at thepursuitzone.com. You can also like and follow on Facebook. The tag is @thepursuitzone. If you want to send me feedback, you can write me at paul@thepursuitzone.com. You can also leave a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. This episode was recorded on October 29th, 2019. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.